The banquet hall of the eternal bloom stretched wider than most cities on Earth. Living walls of pale blue crystal rose up on every side, and between them hung thousands of floating lanterns that gave off a soft golden light. The air smelled of something sweet and old, like honey mixed with rain. It was a smell no human had ever known before the galactic Concord opened its doors to Earth 11 years ago. Commander Ethan Mercer sat at his assigned table near the far end of the hall. It was a polite distance from the high table where the important guests sat, a very polite distance. He did not mind. He had learned early in his posting aboard this ship that distance was a kind of language and the aliens around him spoke it well. His seat told him exactly what he already knew. Humanity was new. Humanity was small. Humanity was welcome, but only just. He wore his dress uniform, dark blue with silver thread at the collar. It was the only human clothing aboard a ship the size of a small moon. Everything else on the eternal bloom was grown, not built. The ship itself was alive in some way that Ethan still did not fully understand. Its corridors breathed. Its walls healed when damaged. Its floors were warm underfoot, like the skin of some enormous sleeping animal. Ethan had lived here for 2 years, and he still caught himself pressing his palm to the walls sometimes, feeling the slow pulse beneath. Around him sat delegates from a dozen species. The Dreth, tall and thin with skin like polished stone, spoke in low clicks and hums. The Korvathi, squat and wide with 4 arms and eyes that glowed faintly orange, argued about trade routes while eating something that moved on their plates. The Thessari did not sit at all. They floated in a cluster near the ceiling, a hive mind of small glowing shapes that thought as one and spoke through a single voice that came from everywhere and nowhere. Ethan ate his food quietly. It was supposed to be chicken. The ship's bio-kitchen had been trying to replicate Earth food for 2 years and still had not gotten it right. The texture was close, but the taste was always slightly off, like a memory of chicken rather than the real thing. He ate it anyway. He had learned not to complain. The hall was full of noise and motion. Hundreds of alien voices filled the air with sounds that ranged from musical tones to deep vibrations that Ethan could feel in his teeth. Laughter, or what passed for laughter among species that found joy in very different things. It was the kind of event that was designed to look relaxed but was actually full of careful politics. Every seat was chosen. Every conversation was weighed. Every glass raised was a small act of diplomacy. Then the room changed. It did not happen all at once. It was more like the way a tide comes in. One by one the conversation slowed, heads turned, bodies shifted. The Dreth stopped their clicking. The Korvathi put down their food. Even the Thessari drifted lower, their glow brightening. Queen Selyara Veltharian entered the banquet hall. She moved through the doorway like light moving through water. She was tall, taller than any human woman Ethan had ever seen, with skin that shimmered between silver and pale violet depending on how the light touched it. Her eyes were large and dark, like 2 pools of ink, and her features were sharp and fine in a way that did not belong to any one idea of beauty, but somehow included all of them. She wore a gown of living fabric that shifted and flowed around her body like smoke, and her hair, white as fresh snow, fell in a straight curtain past her shoulders. But it was not her appearance that drew every eye in the room. It was her presence. The Velanthari were a species that radiated a low-level psychic resonance. Every member of their kind gave off a gentle pull, a warmth that made other beings feel drawn to them, comfortable around them, willing to trust them. It was not mind control. It was more like standing near a fire on a cold night. You did not have to move closer, but you wanted to. Selyara's resonance was the strongest ever recorded in Velanthari history. It had ended wars. It had brokered treaties that centuries of negotiation could not achieve. When she entered a room, every living thing in that room felt her. They turned toward her the way flowers turn toward the sun. It was not a choice. It was something deeper, something older than thought. Every being in the banquet hall turned toward her. Every being except one. Ethan Mercer was looking down at his glass. He held it loosely in his right hand, his thumb tracing a slow circle along the rim. His face was calm. His posture was relaxed. He was not tense, not nervous, not making any visible effort. He simply was not looking at her. It was such a small thing. In a room of 400 alien diplomats, all of them pulled toward the Queen like iron to a magnet. One human sat quietly at his table and stared at the pale liquid in his glass as if it held some secret only he could read. No one else noticed, at least not at first. But Selyara noticed. She always noticed. She moved through the hall with practiced grace, greeting delegates, touching arms, offering the faint smile that made entire species feel honored. She was good at this. She had been doing it for 400 years. She knew exactly how to make a room feel like it belonged to her, and she belonged to it. She spoke the Dreth language without accent. She complimented the Korvathi ambassador's new ceremonial sash. She addressed the Thessari collective by their proper harmonic name, which required producing 3 tones at once, something most non-Thessari could not do. And the whole time, her awareness sat on the human at the far table like a hand resting on a bruise. This was not the first time. Ethan Mercer had been stationed aboard the Eternal Bloom for 2 years. In that time, he had done extraordinary things. He had brokered 3 trade agreements between species that had not spoken to each other in decades. He had mediated a border conflict between the Dreth and the Korvathi that everyone else had declared impossible. He had once spent 14 hours manually repairing a hull breach in a section of the ship, where the living walls had been damaged beyond their ability to heal, saving an entire deck of crew quarters from being exposed to open space. He was quiet, competent, and deeply respected. The other species spoke of him with something close to admiration. The Dreth called him Stone Walker, which in their language meant someone who moved through hardship without breaking. The Korvathi called him the Small Stubborn One, which was the highest compliment they could give to any being with fewer than 4 arms. But in 2 years, Ethan Mercer had never once accepted a private audience with the Queen. He had never attended any event where her presence was guaranteed unless his duty required it. He fulfilled every obligation, attended every required function, and performed his role with a precision that left no room for complaint. But the moment his duty was done, he left. He never lingered. He never sought her out. And he never, not once, met her eyes. The whispers had started months ago. The alien delegates talked about it the way people talk about weather or sports. It was a curiosity, a puzzle, a thing to fill the empty hours between negotiations. Some said it was an insult. The humans were young and arrogant, they argued. They did not understand the honor of being assigned to the Queen's flagship. The human was showing disrespect by refusing to acknowledge her. Others said it was fear. The Velanthari resonance was powerful. Perhaps it affected humans differently. Perhaps it hurt them somehow, the way certain frequencies of sound could shatter glass. Perhaps the human avoided the Queen because her presence caused him pain. A few, mostly the older and wiser delegates, said nothing at all. They simply watched Ethan Mercer with thoughtful eyes and kept their theories to themselves. The banquet continued for 3 more hours. Selyara moved through it like a conductor guiding an orchestra, every gesture deliberate, every word placed with the care of a jeweler setting stones. She was brilliant at this. She had been brilliant at it since before most of the species in this room had achieved spaceflight. Ethan finished his meal. He made polite conversation with the Dreth delegate beside him, a young geologist named Torek who was fascinated by Earth's tectonic activity. He answered questions about volcanoes and earthquakes with patience and good humor. He declined a second glass of the ship's attempt at wine. And then, precisely at the moment when his departure would not be noticed or remarked upon, he stood, offered a respectful nod to his table, and walked toward the exit. He passed within 30 feet of the Queen's position. He did not slow down. He did not look up. He moved through the room like water around a stone, smooth and natural, and completely without effort. Selyara watched him go. Beside her, Lord Valen, her chief advisor, leaned close. He was old, even by Velanthari standards, his silver skin weathered to a duller gray. He had served 3 queens before Selyara and would likely serve none after. He had seen empires rise and crumble and rise again. He means no offense, your radiance, Valen murmured. Humans are peculiar creatures. They are very new to all of this. Selyara did not answer immediately. She watched the doorway through which Ethan had disappeared, the space where he had been felt different from the rest of the room. Every other being left a trace in her awareness, a faint echo of emotion and thought that lingered like perfume in a hallway. The Dreth left behind the cool clarity of stone logic. The Korvathi left warmth and stubbornness and hunger. Even the Thessari, alien as they were, left a humming residue of collective thought. Ethan left nothing. Where he had been, there was only silence, not emptiness, silence, the kind of silence that has weight and shape, the kind that exists only when something is being deliberately held back. It is not offense that troubles me, Valen, Selyara said quietly. Her dark eyes remained fixed on the doorway. The living walls of the ship pulsed gently around her, responding to her mood the way they always did, the light shifting to something cooler, something more uncertain. It is that he is the only soul on this ship whose mind I cannot feel. She turned back to the banquet. She smiled at the next delegate who approached. She resumed her role with the ease of 4 centuries of practice. But beneath the smile, beneath the grace, beneath the ancient and steady calm that had held a galactic dominion together through wars and plagues and the slow death of stars, something small and sharp had taken root. A question. And Selyara Veltharian was not the kind of queen who left questions unanswered. Ethan Mercer woke every morning at 5 o'clock ship time. The eternal bloom did not have a real sunrise, but the living walls shifted from deep blue to pale gold at the start of each cycle, and the air changed, becoming lighter and cooler, as if the ship itself was breathing in and getting ready for the day. It was the closest thing to morning that existed this far from any sun. He rolled out of his narrow bunk and pulled on his exercise clothes. His quarters were small, even by military standards. A bed, a desk, a chair, a storage locker, and a narrow window that looked out into the black. The room was clean and spare and told you almost nothing about the man who lived in it, except that he did not need much. Almost nothing. On the desk sat a small locked case. It was metal, dull gray, no bigger than a book. It had no markings on it. Ethan glanced at it the way a person glances at a clock, automatically without thinking, just to confirm that it was still there. Then he left. He exercised alone in a cargo bay on the lower decks. The bay was empty at this hour, and the living floor was firm enough to support his weight when he ran. He ran 4 miles every morning, then moved through a series of push-ups, pull-ups, and bodyweight exercises that would have looked familiar to any soldier on Earth. The first time the other species had watched him exercise, they had been unsettled. The Dreth, who were strong but moved with careful precision, found the raw, sweating physicality of human exercise disturbing. The Korvathi, who had 4 arms and could lift 3 times their body weight, watched with a kind of horrified respect. One of them had told Ethan, very seriously, that humans looked like they were fighting their own bodies, and Ethan had laughed and said that was not entirely wrong. Now he trained alone, and no one watched, and that was fine. After his run, he showered with recycled water that always tasted slightly of minerals and dressed in his duty uniform. He ate breakfast in his quarters because the common dining hall served food that was designed for species with very different ideas about what tasted good. The ship's bio-kitchen had been trying to replicate Earth food since he arrived, and the results were getting closer but were never quite right. This morning it was supposed to be oatmeal. It had the right texture but tasted faintly of flowers. He ate it without complaint. Then he went to work. Ethan's official title was Human Diplomatic Liaison to the Velenthari Dominion. In practice, it meant he was the only human on a ship of thousands, and his job was to make sure that humanity's smallest and newest presence in the galactic concord did not get forgotten, stepped on, or quietly pushed aside. It was a job that required patience, precision, and the ability to sit in a room full of beings who had been running civilizations for 10,000 years, and calmly explain why Earth's interests mattered too. He was good at it, better than good. That morning, he spent 2 hours reviewing a mining rights proposal with the Korvathi trade delegation. The Korvathi negotiator, a broad female named Theska, had been trying to slip a clause into the agreement that would give her people exclusive access to a mineral deposit in a system that bordered human space. Ethan found it on page 47, buried under 14 layers of legal language that was clearly designed to be too boring for anyone to read carefully. He pointed it out with a small, polite smile. Theska stared at him for a long moment, then burst out laughing. All four of her arms slapped the table at once, which was the Korvathi way of expressing deep respect for an opponent who had beaten you fairly. "You are very annoying, small, stubborn one," she said. "Thank you," Ethan replied. After the meeting, he stopped by the engineering deck to help a young Dreth engineer named Torek with a structural calculation. The Eternal Bloom's living hull was constantly growing and shifting, and the engineering team had to recalculate load distributions every few days. Torek was brilliant but young and prone to second-guessing himself. Ethan sat with him for 20 minutes, not doing the work for him, but asking the right questions until Torek found the answer himself. "You are very patient, Commander," Torek said as Ethan stood to leave. "You are very smart, Torek. You just do not believe it yet." Later, in the navigation bay, he found a Korvathi navigator named Resk sitting alone in a corner, staring at a star chart with the expression of someone who was not really seeing what was in front of him. Ethan recognized that look. He had worn it himself, more times than he could count. He sat down beside Resk and without a word produced a small metal container from his pocket. He opened it and held it out. Inside was real earth coffee, ground and sealed before he left home. It was one of his most precious possessions. He had perhaps enough for another 30 cups, and there would be no more after that. Resk looked at the container. He looked at Ethan. His forearms curled inward, which was the Korvathi posture for gratitude that went deeper than words. "How did you know?" Resk asked quietly. "Know what?" "That I was thinking of home." Ethan sealed the container and put it back in his pocket. "Because everyone does out here, and no one should have to do it alone." These were the hours of Ethan Mercer's days. He worked. He helped. He solved problems and smoothed conflicts and made himself useful in 100 small ways that no one asked for and everyone appreciated. He was kind, but quietly. He was strong, but carefully. He moved through the ship like someone who had made peace with being the only one of his kind in an ocean of strangers, and who had decided that this was simply his life now, and he would do it well. But then the day would end, and the quiet hours would come. In the evenings, after his shift, Ethan would go to the observation deck on the upper level of the ship. It was a wide, curved platform enclosed in a transparent wall that looked out onto open space. Most of the crew avoided it. Space, seen without the filter of instruments or screens, was too big and too empty for most species to look at for long. It made them feel small in a way that went past thought and into something more basic, more animal. Ethan went there almost every night. He would stand at the window or sometimes sit on the floor with his back against the wall, and he would look out at the stars. Not all of them. His eyes always drifted to the same patch of sky, a small, unremarkable cluster of distant lights in the upper left corner of his view. He would watch those stars the way a man watches the door of a house he used to live in. Sometimes he brought the locked case from his desk. He would hold it in his lap without opening it, his thumbs resting on the cool metal. And he would sit there until the ship's lights dimmed to their night cycle. He was not miserable. That was the thing that would have confused anyone watching. He did not weep. He did not rage. He did not carry himself like a man in pain. He carried himself like a man who had taken something heavy and placed it carefully inside his chest, and then built the rest of his life around it, the way a city is built around an old stone that no one can move. Meanwhile, the Queen was asking questions. Selyara had begun her investigation quietly, through conversations with her advisors and the senior delegates of other species. She wanted to understand humans. More specifically, she wanted to understand this human. The Korvathi ambassador told her that humans formed irrational emotional bonds with individual people. Not just family or mates, but friends, colleagues, even strangers they had known for only a short time. They would sacrifice themselves for these bonds without any logical analysis of cost and benefit. It is inefficient, the ambassador said, and it is terrifying. The Dreth elder told her that humans were one of the only species in the Concord that could override their own biological instincts through pure willpower. A Dreth could not ignore pain. A Korvathi could not suppress hunger. But a human could look at a fire and choose to walk into it if their reasons were strong enough. Their bodies tell them to stop, the elder said, and they stop listening. The Thessari collective, when asked, gave the answer that stayed with Selyara the longest. The hive mind spoke through its single shared voice, and the voice was thoughtful and slow, and carried the weight of 1,000,000 individual minds thinking together. Humans are the loneliest species we have ever encountered. They are born alone in their own skulls, and they die the same way. They cannot share their thoughts. They cannot feel each other's pain directly. Each one is sealed inside a single body with a single mind, and there is no bridge between them that does not require effort and trust and risk. And yet they love as though that aloneness does not exist. They reach across the gap between themselves and others, and they hold on with everything they have, knowing that the connection could break at any moment, knowing that the other person could leave or die or simply stop caring. It is the most terrifying thing about them, and it is the most beautiful. Selyara carried these words with her for days. Then the wreckage came. A Velanthari patrol found the remains of a colony transport ship drifting in a dead sector. The ship had been attacked by unknown forces and left to break apart. There were no survivors. There were only bodies, floating in the cold between the torn metal walls of what had been their home. Ethan volunteered to lead the recovery team before anyone asked him to. He worked for 11 hours in the wreckage, moving through shattered corridors in a pressure suit, tagging bodies for retrieval, cataloging damage, and coordinating with the Velanthari medical team. He was calm and efficient and spoke in the steady voice of a man who had done hard things before and knew how to keep moving through them. When they found the children, everything changed. Not visibly. Ethan did not break down or shout or fall apart, but something in the quality of his silence shifted, the way the temperature of a room shifts when someone opens a window to the cold. There were 9 children, alien children, Korvathi and Dreth, small and still and curled in on themselves the way children curl when they are frightened. They had died in their sleep quarters, huddled together in the dark. Ethan insisted on recovering every single one. The team leader, a Velanthari officer, told him that the last 2 were in a section of the hull that was collapsing, that the risk was too high, that they could be retrieved later by a drone. Ethan looked at him with eyes that were perfectly calm and absolutely immovable and said, "No child gets left behind. Not ever." He went in alone. The hull section collapsed around him as he worked. He broke 2 ribs and cracked his helmet. He carried the last child's body out with one arm while holding his helmet seal closed with the other. When he returned to the docking bay, bleeding and exhausted, Selyara was waiting. She had not planned to be there. She had come because something had pulled her, the way her own resonance pulled others, and she did not know what it was. He walked down the ramp with the alien child still cradled against his chest. The medical team rushed forward. Ethan let them take the body, gently, carefully, the way you hand over something that matters more than your own life. Then he straightened. And for one single moment, his eyes met hers. Selyara felt something flash through her psychic awareness. It was not his thoughts. Human minds were closed to her, sealed behind a wall she could not pass. But she felt the shape of his emotion, just for an instant, like pressing her hand against a door and feeling the heat of a fire on the other side. It was vast, it was deep, and it was older than it should have been, older than any emotion she had ever felt from a species as young as humanity. It was like touching the edge of a black hole, something so dense and so compressed that it bent everything around it without breaking. Then he looked away. He nodded once respectfully and walked past her toward the medical bay. Selyara stood in the docking bay for a long time after he was gone. The air still smelled of burned metal and cold space. The living walls of the ship pulsed around her, responding to her confusion, shifting through shades of uncertain blue. She had lived for 400 years. She had felt the minds of millions. She had held dying stars in her awareness and guided civilizations through their darkest hours. And she had never, not once, felt anything like what she had just felt in that single second of contact with a human mind. She did not understand it yet. But she would. The announcement came 3 days after the wreckage recovery. It arrived as a formal notice on Ethan's desk terminal, written in the flowing script of the Velenthari diplomatic language and translated, somewhat stiffly, into English below. Commander Ethan Mercer of Earth was being appointed as humanity's representative to the Queen's Inner Council, effective immediately. The Inner Council was the most powerful political body on the Eternal Bloom. It consisted of one representative from each of the 6 senior species in the Galactic Concord, plus Lord Valen as the Queen's chief advisor, plus the Queen herself. They met every morning in a chamber deep inside the ship's core, behind doors that no outsider had ever passed through uninvited. Their decisions shaped trade, territory, law, and war for 100 star systems. No human had ever been asked to sit on the Inner Council. The invitation was, by any measure, an extraordinary honor for the youngest species in the Concord. Earth's government, when informed, sent a message of congratulations so enthusiastic that Ethan could almost hear them shouting through the text. Ethan read the appointment notice twice. Then he closed the terminal, leaned back in his chair, and closed his eyes. He knew exactly what she was doing. The Inner Council required daily private briefings with the Queen, not group meetings. Private, one-on-one briefings. Each council member met with Selyara individually to discuss the matters relevant to their species and their region of space. It was tradition. It was protocol. And it was, by the structure of the Concord's own laws, impossible to refuse without creating a diplomatic incident that would embarrass Earth and potentially damage humanity's standing in the Concord for years. She had trapped him, and she had done it with an honor so great that refusing it would look like madness. Ethan sat alone in his quarters for a long time that evening. The ship's walls shifted through their slow evening colors, moving from gold to amber to the deep indigo of the night cycle. The light played across the small, locked case on his desk. He reached for it. His fingers found the lock by touch, the combination so familiar that his hands moved without his mind telling them to. The lid opened. Inside was a photograph. It was old, printed on real paper, the kind of photograph that no one made anymore because everyone used screens and holograms and digital frames that could hold 1,000 images at once. But this was a single image, faded slightly at the edges, its colors softened by time and handling. A woman stood in a garden. She had dark hair pulled back from her face and a wide, easy smile that crinkled the corners of her eyes. She was not looking at the camera. She was looking down at the small girl who stood beside her. A child of about 4 years old with the same dark hair and a serious expression on her round face. The child was holding a flower, something yellow, and was studying it with the deep concentration that only very young children can give to very small things. Behind them, the garden was green and bright and full of sunlight. There was a wooden fence, a patch of sky, and the blurred shape of a house in the background. It was an ordinary photograph of an ordinary moment in an ordinary garden on an ordinary day. Ethan held it for a long time. He did not cry. He did not speak. He held the photograph the way you hold a candle in a dark room, carefully, knowing that if you move too fast the light will go out. Then he put it back. He locked the case. He pressed his hands over his face and sat on the edge of his bed and breathed, slowly, deliberately, the way a man breathes when he is reminding himself that breathing is something he can control even when everything else is not. The next morning, he reported to the inner council chamber at the appointed time. The chamber was a living room like everything else on the ship, but older somehow, deeper. The walls were thick with growth, layers of crystal and organic matter that had been building on themselves for centuries. The ceiling was high and curved, and the light came from within the walls themselves, a steady, warm glow that never flickered. A round table stood at the center, carved from a single piece of the ship's living material. 7 chairs surrounded it, each shaped differently to accommodate the body of a different species. An 8th chair had been added, small and plain and clearly new. Ethan's chair. The other council members were already seated when he arrived. The Dreth representative, a scarred female named High Commander Veska, nodded to him with the careful respect the Dreth gave to anyone who had proven themselves under pressure. The Korvathi ambassador, Old Theska herself, gave him a wide grin that showed all 3 rows of her teeth. The Thessari collective hovered in a specially designed suspension field above their place at the table, their combined glow shifting in patterns that Ethan had learned to read as curiosity. The other 3 representatives, a Melkai crystal singer, a Voreth deep space navigator, and a Theni biologist, watched him with expressions that ranged from polite interest to mild suspicion. Humanity was still new. Trust took time. Lord Valen stood at the Queen's right hand. He gave Ethan a look that contained sympathy, warning, and a hint of something that might have been amusement, all compressed into a single glance that lasted less than a second. Then Selyara entered. The room shifted. It always shifted when she arrived. The air became heavier, warmer, and every being in the room leaned slightly toward her without meaning to. It was not a conscious thing. It was deeper than that, built into the biology of every species that had evolved to recognize safety and power and welcome. Ethan did not lean. He sat straight in his chair, his hands folded on the table, his eyes focused on a point just above her left shoulder, close enough to be respectful, far enough to avoid her gaze. The first week of council meetings went smoothly. Ethan was impeccable. He arrived on time, prepared, with thorough notes on every topic. When he spoke, he was clear and direct and never wasted a word. He asked intelligent questions. He offered solutions that were practical and fair. He disagreed when he needed to, always with evidence, never with emotion. Several of the other council members began to revise their opinions of humanity upward. The private briefings were harder. Every afternoon, Ethan walked into a small meeting room adjacent to the council chamber and sat across from the Queen of the Velenthari Dominion, alone. Just the 2 of them, a table between them, the ship's walls pulsing gently with her presence. He maintained perfect protocol. He stood when she entered. He sat when she sat. He addressed her as Your Radiance, never by name. He stood precisely where tradition demanded, never closer. He answered every question fully and honestly and volunteered nothing personal. He was polite, professional, and as carefully controlled as a clock. Selyara watched all of this with the patience of a being who had been studying other species for 400 years. She saw the control. She saw the effort it required. And she saw, beneath both of those things, something that most people would have missed entirely. He was not cold. He was not distant. He was holding something in place, the way you hold a door shut against a strong wind. And the effort, invisible to anyone who was not looking for it, was constant. On the 8th day, she tested him. It was a Velenthari tradition, she explained to the council that morning. A trust-building ritual. Each member of the inner council would share a single memory through the psychic link that the Velenthari used to connect minds. The sharing was voluntary. The memory could be anything, but the act of opening your mind, even briefly, was considered the deepest form of trust among Selyara's people. One by one, the council members participated. High Commander Veska shared a memory of her first command, the pride and terror of it. Old Theska shared a memory of her children's birth, all 12 of them arriving at once, which was apparently normal for Korvathi. The Thessari shared a fragment of collective memory that felt, to everyone in the room, like standing inside a sunrise scene through a million eyes at once. Then it was Ethan's turn. The room went quiet. Everyone knew that human minds were closed to Velenthari resonance. The psychic link simply did not work on them. Human brains were wired differently, sealed inside their own skulls in a way that no telepathic species had ever been able to bridge. Ethan could have simply said he was unable to participate. No one would have blamed him. Protocol allowed for biological incompatibility. Instead, he stood up. He looked at the space just beside Selyara's eyes. Not at them. Beside them. Close enough that it could have been mistaken for eye contact by anyone who was not paying very close attention. And he spoke. "I cannot share a memory the way you do," he said. His voice was steady. "But I can tell you one." He paused, then he began. "There is a smell that happens on Earth when rain falls on hot pavement. It is called petrichor. It is made of oils released by the ground and chemicals produced by bacteria in the soil. And none of that matters because when you smell it, all you feel is that something has been waiting a long time to be released, and finally it is free." He paused again. "There is a sound that a child makes when she is laughing in a hallway. Not the laugh itself, but the echo of it. The way it bounces off the walls and comes back to you slightly changed, slightly softer, as if the house itself is laughing with her." The room was completely still. "And there is a feeling," Ethan said, "that comes from holding someone's hand. Not tightly, loosely. The way you hold a hand when you know the other person is not going anywhere, and you are not going anywhere, and the only reason you are holding on is because you want to, because the warmth of their skin against yours is the most honest language you have ever spoken." His voice did not break. His eyes did not water. He stood before the most powerful beings in the galaxy and described something so small and so human that none of them had ever experienced anything like it. And he did it with a steadiness that was itself a kind of statement. "Humans cannot share memories," he finished. "We can only describe them, and every description is a little bit wrong, a little bit less than the real thing. We know this. We have always known this. We tell each other about our lives knowing that the words will never be enough, and we tell each other anyway because the trying is what matters, the reaching across." He sat down. No one spoke for a long time. High Commander Veska, who had fought in 11 wars and never once shown emotion in a council session, looked down at her hands. Old Theska's 4 arms were folded tight against her body, which was the Korvathi posture for something that went deeper than language. The Thessari collective's glow had dimmed to a single, steady pulse, which meant they were thinking so hard that they had no energy left for light. After the council adjourned, the others filed out in unusual silence. Ethan gathered his notes and moved toward the door. Selyara's voice stopped him. "Commander Mercer." He paused. He did not turn fully. He angled his body just enough to indicate he was listening, his eyes fixed on the wall beside the doorway. "Why do you avoid me?" It was the first time she had asked him directly. No politics, no ceremony. No carefully structured diplomatic language. Just the question, plain and clear. Ethan was quiet for 3 heartbeats. She counted them by the pulse she could feel from his body across the room, faster than it should have been, though his face showed nothing. "With respect, Your Radiance," he said, "I am not avoiding you." He shifted his weight slightly, and for one fraction of a second, his composure cracked like ice on a pond. Not broken, just cracked, just enough to show the dark water underneath. "I am protecting you." He walked through the door before she could respond. His footsteps echoed down the corridor, steady and measured and perfectly controlled, and then they were gone. Selyara stood alone in the council chamber. The walls pulsed around her, reading her confusion, her frustration, and something else, something new that she did not yet have a name for. Protecting her, he had said he was protecting her. From what? The archive vault of the Eternal Bloom sat at the very heart of the ship, deeper than any other chamber, protected by walls so thick and old that they had their own pulse, separate from the rest of the vessel. It was a living library. The Velanthari did not store knowledge on screens or in databases. They grew it. Every history, every treaty, every cultural record of every species in the galactic conquered existed here as a pattern encoded in the crystalline structure of the walls themselves. You did not read the archive. You touched it, and it showed you what you needed to know. Selyara had not visited the archive vault in 200 years. She had not needed to. When you had lived for 4 centuries and held the memories of your entire species in your psychic awareness, there was very little that required looking up. But tonight, 3 days after Ethan Mercer had told her he was protecting her and then walked away without explanation, she pushed open the ancient doors and stepped inside. The vault recognized her immediately. The walls brightened, shifting from deep blue to warm amber, and a gentle hum filled the air, the sound of millions of stored memories vibrating at a frequency just below hearing. The floor was soft underfoot, warm and yielding, like walking on moss. "Earth," she said aloud, "show me everything." The walls responded. Patterns of light rippled outward from where she stood, and information began to flow. Selyara pressed her palm flat against the nearest wall and closed her eyes. Earth's entry in the archive was small. Humanity had been part of the conquered for only 11 years, and before that, they had been a curiosity, a loud and restless species on a small blue planet orbiting an unremarkable star in the outer edges of the galaxy. Their technology was young. Their history was short by galactic standards. Their interstellar presence was barely a footnote. But what they lacked in time, they made up for in density. Earth's cultural archive was packed tight with information, as if the species had been trying to cram 10,000 years of experience into a fraction of the time that older civilizations had taken to achieve the same things. There were records of art, music, literature, philosophy, science, war, peace, invention, and failure. More failure than most species would have been willing to admit to. Selyara moved through the data quickly, skimming past the technical and political records, looking for something specific. She was looking for the thing that would explain the shape she had felt in Ethan's mind during that single moment of contact in the docking bay. That vast, compressed, impossibly dense darkness. She found it under the cultural heading labeled Emotional Processing and Loss. The entry was clinical at first. It described the human neurological response to losing someone close to them. The chemical changes in the brain, the physical symptoms, pain in the chest, difficulty breathing, loss of appetite, inability to concentrate, the disruption to sleep patterns. The way human memory worked, storing not just facts but sensations, so that a grieving human might smell a certain flower and be thrown back into a moment with the person they had lost so vividly that their body reacted as if that person were still beside them. Selyara read all of this with the calm interest of a scientist studying a new phenomenon. These things were not unique to humans. Every species in the conquered experienced loss. Every species grieved. Then she reached the section that made her stop. It was a comparative analysis, written by a Thessari researcher who had spent 30 years studying emotional processing across all known species. The researcher had examined how different civilizations handled the death of loved ones, the mechanisms they used to survive the experience and eventually move past it. The Velenthari, the researcher noted, dealt with grief through their psychic resonance. When a Velenthari lost someone, the pain was shared across their community. It flowed outward through the psychic field like heat dissipating from a stone dropped into cool water. The grief did not disappear, but it was distributed, carried by many minds instead of one. Within weeks, the sharpest edges were dulled. Within months, the loss settled into a gentle, communal sadness that the entire community held together, and no single individual had to bear alone. The Dreth processed grief through ritual, structured, formal, precise. They built memory stones for their dead, carved the names and deeds of the lost into permanent rock, and then they returned to their duties. The stone carried the memory so the living did not have to. The Korvathi grieved loudly and physically. They broke things. They shouted. They fought each other in controlled combat arenas until the pain was exhausted from their bodies. Then they ate a large meal together and spoke the name of the dead one final time, and the name was not spoken again. The Thessari, as a hive mind, did not experience individual loss the way other species did. When one of their number died, the collective absorbed the individual's memories and experiences into the whole. Nothing was truly lost, nothing was truly gone. Every species had a mechanism, a way to process, distribute, or release the weight of loss so that it did not crush the individual carrying it. Every species except one. Humans, the researcher wrote, had no mechanism. They had no psychic field to share their pain. They had no ritual that transferred memory to stone. They had no collective consciousness to absorb their dead. They had no biological release valve that converted grief into anger or exhaustion and then shut it off. Humans carried their dead inside them. When a human lost someone they loved, the grief did not dissipate. It did not distribute. It did not fade in the way that other species' grief faded. It remained whole and intact and permanent, buried inside the human's mind like a stone sunk to the bottom of a deep lake. The water of their daily life closed over it. They continued to function. They went to work. They ate. They spoke. They even laughed. But the stone was always there, resting at the very center of them, and nothing, no amount of time, no amount of effort, no amount of healing ever moved it. The researcher had used a metaphor that Selyara read 3 times before she understood it. Humans, the researcher wrote, were like trees that grow around a stone. The stone does not change. The stone does not shrink. But the tree keeps growing, wrapping its roots and trunk and bark around the thing that will not move, and eventually the stone becomes part of the tree. Not absorbed, not dissolved, just held, permanently. The tree and the stone together for as long as the tree lives. Humans did not recover from grief. They grew around it. And the most remarkable thing, the thing that the Thessari researcher called the defining characteristic of humanity, was that they did this on purpose. They knew the stone would never move. They knew the grief would never leave. And they chose to keep going anyway, chose to love again, chose to build new relationships and form new bonds with the full and certain knowledge that every bond would eventually become another stone. They loved as if loss did not exist, and they carried loss as if love demanded it. Selyara pulled her hand from the wall. The archive dimmed around her, the glow of stored knowledge fading to a soft background pulse. She stood in the center of the vault, surrounded by the collected wisdom of 100 civilizations, and she felt something she had not felt in centuries. She felt small. There was more. She knew there was more. She had come here looking for answers about one human, and the archive had a file on him specifically, submitted as part of his diplomatic application. It was classified. It was personal. Opening it without his consent was a violation of the protocols she herself had established. She opened it. Ethan Mercer, born in a city called Portland on the western coast of North America, enlisted in Earth's early interstellar defense corps at age 22, showed exceptional aptitude for languages and cross-cultural communication, married at 25 to a woman named Lena Akafer Mercer, daughter born 1 year later, name, Maya. Selyara read the next section slowly. 7 years ago, a catastrophic first contact incident occurred between humanity and the Thessari collective. It was later called the Thessari Border Incident. A human colony ship entering a border system was misidentified by the Thessari hive mind as a hostile vessel. The Thessari, who processed threat information collectively and reacted as one, responded with overwhelming force before any communication could be established. The colony was destroyed. 4,600 humans died. Among them were Lena Akafer Mercer, age 32, and Maya Mercer, age 6. Ethan Mercer survived because he was off-world at the time, assigned to a training exercise in a neighboring system. He learned of the destruction 16 hours after it happened, from a field report that listed the dead in alphabetical order. The file noted that the incident was later determined to be a tragic miscommunication. The Thessari hive mind had never encountered a species that broadcast electromagnetic signals the way humans did, and it had interpreted the colony ship's standard communication array as a weapons targeting system. The error was genuine. The horror, once the Thessari understood what they had done, was absolute. The collective had offered to dissolve an entire branch of its consciousness as penance, an act equivalent to a human cutting off their own arm. Ethan Mercer had been the one to stop them. In the months that followed, While Earth's government debated retaliation, and the Thessari collective spiraled into guilt so deep it threatened to fracture their hive mind, Ethan had volunteered for the diplomatic team tasked with negotiating a peace accord. He had sat across the table from the species that had killed his wife and daughter, and he had listened to them. He had learned their communication patterns. He had found the gap in understanding that had led to the misidentification. And he had proposed the solution that became the foundation of the peace treaty, a standardized first contact protocol that was now used by every species in the conquered. He had saved the Thessari from themselves. He had saved humanity from a war they might have won, but would have lost their souls fighting. And he had done all of this with the stone of his dead wife and daughter sitting at the center of his chest, unmoved, undiminished, permanent. The treaty was the reason humanity had been invited to join the galactic conquered. Ethan Mercer's grief was, in a way that he would never have chosen and never wanted, the foundation of everything humanity had built in the stars. Selyara closed the file. She sat on the floor of the archive vault, something she had not done since she was young, and she pressed her back against the living wall and let the ship's heartbeat pulse through her. She sat there for a very long time. That evening she went to the observation deck. She did not announce herself. She did not bring guards or advisors. She wore a simple gown, unadorned, the kind of clothing she put on when she wanted to be a person instead of a queen. She found him exactly where she knew he would be. Ethan sat on the floor with his back against the transparent wall. The stars spread out behind him like a field of scattered diamonds. His eyes were fixed on the same patch of sky they were always fixed on, that small cluster of lights in the upper left corner of his view. She realized, with a sensation like a hand closing around her heart, that he was looking in the direction of the colony where his family had died. He had been looking at it every night for 2 years, keeping watch over a grave he would never be able to visit. She did not speak. She did not project her presence. She dimmed her resonance as much as she could, pulling it inward, making herself as quiet as a Velanthari could be. Then she walked to where he sat and she lowered herself to the floor beside him, not close enough to touch, not far enough to ignore. She sat with about an arm's length between them, the same distance a friend would choose, and she folded her hands in her lap and looked out at the stars. Ethan did not react. He did not stand or salute or call her your radiance. He sat still for a long moment, and then his head turned slightly, just enough to register her presence, and then it turned back to the stars. They sat together in silence. The ship's night cycle deepened around them, the walls dimming to their lowest glow. The stars burned on, indifferent to the 2 small figures watching them from behind a wall of glass. Selyara did not ask her question. Not yet. She could feel the weight of it between them, the same question she had asked in the council chamber, but heavier now, loaded with everything she had learned in the archive. She let it wait. Some questions, she understood now, needed silence before they needed answers. They sat in silence for a long time. The stars did not move, or rather, they moved so slowly that no eye could measure it, and the effect was the same. The observation deck was empty except for the 2 of them. The ship's walls had dimmed to their lowest nighttime glow, a soft blue-violet that was almost black, and the only real light came from outside, from the infinite scatter of stars that filled the view from edge to edge. Ethan sat with his back against the window. His hands rested on his knees, still and relaxed. His breathing was slow and even. He did not look at Selyara. He did not look away from her either. He simply sat the way a man sits when he has been carrying something heavy for so long that the weight has become part of his posture, part of his bones, and putting it down would feel stranger than keeping it. Selyara sat beside him with her hands folded in her lap. She had pulled her resonance inward as far as it would go, but she knew it was not enough. She could feel it reaching toward him despite her efforts, the way heat reaches outward from a fire even when you try to contain it. It was her nature. It was what she was. She could dim it, but she could not silence it. She had planned to ease into the question. She had planned to find a diplomatic way to approach it, something gentle and indirect, the way Velanthari handled sensitive conversations, circling the truth slowly, giving the other person time to prepare. But sitting here, on the floor in the dark, with no crown and no title and nothing between them but an arm's length of empty space, she found that she did not want to be diplomatic. She did not want to be a queen. She wanted to be a person asking another person a question that mattered. "Ethan," she said. It was the first time she had used his first name. He noticed. She could see the slight tightening of his jaw, the tiny shift in his shoulders. Not alarm, recognition. He knew what was coming. "Why do you avoid me?" Her voice was quiet. There was no command in it, no authority, no weight of 400 years of rule. It was just a voice, just a question. Ethan did not answer immediately. He sat with the question the way he sat with everything, calmly, completely, letting it settle into place before he decided what to do with it. The stars burned behind him. The ship breathed around them. Then he spoke. "Your resonance," he said, "the psychic presence you give off, the thing that draws every living being toward you." Selyara waited. "The other species feel it as trust," Ethan continued. "Safety, a desire to be near you, to listen to you, to follow you. The Dreth feel it as respect for authority. The Korvathi feel it as warmth. The Thessari feel it as a harmonic frequency that aligns with their collective consciousness. Each species translates it differently, based on what their brains are built to recognize." He paused. "It works on humans too." Selyara's hands tightened slightly in her lap. This was something she had long suspected but never been able to confirm. Human minds were closed to her. She could not feel their thoughts, could not read their emotions, could not sense the shape of their inner world the way she could with every other species. Humans were black boxes, sealed rooms, the only species in the conquered whose minds were invisible to her. "It does not work the way it works on others," Ethan said. "We cannot hear your thoughts, we cannot feel the psychic link, but the resonance itself, the pull, the warmth that reaches us, it gets through." He turned his head slightly, not enough to look at her, but enough to speak toward her instead of toward the stars. "In humans, it registers as something very specific. It does not feel like trust or respect or harmony. It feels like comfort, deep, personal, specific comfort, the kind of comfort that comes from being known, from being safe, from being with someone who will not leave." His voice was steady, but there was something underneath it now, something that was costing him effort to hold in place. Like a man walking on ice, each word placed carefully, each step measured. For most humans, it would be pleasant, a nice feeling. They might not even notice where it was coming from. They would just feel a little warmer, a little calmer, a little more at ease. And for most humans, that would be fine. He stopped. The silence that followed was not empty. It was full of something pressing against its edges, something that wanted out. "For me," he said, "it is not fine." Selyara did not move. She did not breathe. She listened with everything she had, with 400 years of experience in understanding other beings, and she felt, even without her psychic abilities, that she was standing at the edge of something she could not take back. "Your resonance does not feel like a stranger's presence to me," Ethan said. "It does not feel like a queen or an alien or a powerful telepath. It feels like coming home." The words fell into the silence between them, like stones into deep water. "It feels like Lena's hand in mine, the specific shape of her fingers, the exact temperature of her skin. It feels like Maya's weight on my chest when she fell asleep watching cartoons on the couch, that particular heaviness of a sleeping child who trusts you so completely that every muscle in their body lets go at once." His voice did not break. That was the thing that mattered. His voice held steady, the way a bridge holds steady over a river, not because the current is weak, but because the bridge was built by someone who understood how strong the current would be. "It feels like the specific frequency of being loved by someone who chose you, not because they had to, not because biology or duty or politics required it, but because they looked at you and decided, yes, this one. I will hold on to this one." Selyara's chest ached. She did not know human grief, not the way humans knew it, but she recognized pain when she heard it, and this was not just pain. This was pain that had been examined, understood, mapped, and then carefully, deliberately carried. "I know it is not real," Ethan said. "I know it is your biology, not mine. I know it is resonance, not love. I know that if I stand close to you, my brain is taking a signal it does not fully understand and translating it into the closest thing it knows, and the closest thing it knows is them." He was quiet for a moment. "And that is why I cannot stand close to you." Selyara finally spoke. Her voice was barely above a whisper. "Because it hurts." "No," Ethan said. "Because it does not hurt, because it feels good, because it feels like relief. And I'm afraid of what that relief would cost me." He turned then, not fully, but enough that she could see his profile, the hard line of his jaw, the shadows under his eyes, the way his brow was set in a line that was not frowning but was holding something in place, something that weighed more than a human face was designed to carry. "When Lena and Maya died, something inside me closed. A door, a room, whatever you want to call it. The part of me where they lived sealed itself shut. And behind that door is everything, every memory, every feeling. The smell of Lena's hair after she came in from the garden. The sound Maya made when she was concentrating on something, this little humming noise she did not know she was making. The way our house smelled on Sunday mornings. The weight of my daughter's hand in mine when we walked to the park." He pressed his palms together between his knees, fingers laced tight. "That door is the only thing I have left of them. The grief behind it is not a wound. It is a monument. It is the last proof that they existed, that they mattered, that they were loved so much that losing them broke something in me that will never be repaired." "And your resonance," he said, looking at the stars again, "feels like a key to that door. It feels like permission to open it and let the warmth flood in and fill up all the space where the grief used to be. It feels like healing." He was quiet for 3 heartbeats, 4, 5. "And I do not want to be healed." The words hung in the air between them. "I would rather carry this weight for the rest of my life than set it down and lose the last piece of them I have. The grief is where they live now. It is the house I built for them after their real house was taken away. And I will not let anything, not time, not distance, not the most powerful psychic force in the galaxy, come in and make it smaller." He looked at her then, fully. For the first time in 2 years, Ethan Mercer looked directly into the eyes of the Queen of the Velanthari Dominion. "I do not avoid you because I dislike you, your radiance. I avoid you because you feel like everything I have lost. And if I stand too close for too long, I am afraid I will forget what missing them feels like. And that is the one thing I cannot survive." Selyara looked back at him. Her dark eyes, ancient and vast and accustomed to seeing the inner workings of every mind in the galaxy, met his, and for the first time in 400 years she had no answer. Not because she did not understand. She understood completely. She understood in a way that went past her telepathy, past her wisdom, past everything she had accumulated in centuries of rule. She understood that she was looking at a species that built monuments out of pain and called them love. A species that refused to be healed because healing meant forgetting, and forgetting was the only death they truly feared. A species that carried its dead not as a burden but as a privilege, a sacred weight that proved they had once held something worth losing. Her people shared their grief until it became bearable. His people bore their grief alone until it became beautiful. She did not try to comfort him. She did not offer to dim her resonance further. She did not reach for his hand or tell him it would be all right or promise that time would ease the pain, because she knew now that he did not want the pain eased, and that was not a flaw. It was the most human thing she had ever encountered. Instead, she did the only thing that mattered. She stayed. She sat beside him in the dark, on the cold floor of an observation deck that looked out onto a universe neither of them had asked for but both of them had to live in, and she let the silence hold what words could not. 2 rulers of very different kinds, one who commanded a galaxy, one who commanded only himself, and between them, a quiet understanding that asked for nothing and offered nothing and was, because of that, the most honest thing either of them had shared in a very long time. The stars burned on, the ship breathed, The night cycle deepened toward morning. Neither of them moved. The next day, Ethan arrived at the inner council briefing at the usual time. He took his place at the table. He set his notes in front of him. He straightened his uniform. Everything was exactly as it had been every morning for weeks. Then Selyara entered. She moved through the doorway with the same grace she always carried, the same glow, the same ancient, steady presence that filled the room like sunlight fills a cathedral. The other council members turned toward her, drawn by the resonance they could not resist. But something was different. On the sash of her gown, just above her heart, she wore a small pin. It was a Velanthari mourning sigil, a symbol reserved for honoring the dead of other species. It was one of the oldest traditions in the Dominion, and it was almost never used because it required the wearer to understand the specific nature of the grief they were honoring. The pin was shaped like a stone, wrapped in the roots of a tree. The other council members stared. Lord Valen, standing at his usual position, drew a slow breath. The Thessari collective's glow shifted to a deep, reverent gold. Ethan saw it. His breath caught. His hands, resting on the table, went still. His eyes moved from the pin to her face, and for the second time he looked at her directly, fully, without looking away. Something passed between them, not psychic, not telepathic, something older and simpler than that, an understanding, a recognition, the acknowledgement that one person had seen another person clearly, not as a species or a title or a mystery, but as a soul carrying something heavy and choosing to carry it well. He did not smile, but he nodded, a single, slow nod that carried the weight of everything he could not say. And she nodded back. The council meeting began. The business of governing a galaxy resumed. The delegates spoke of trade routes and patrol schedules, and the allocation of resources to developing worlds. And across the vast, cold, star-scattered dark between their two species, something small and unbreakable took root. Not love, not yet, not the way either of their species would define it, but something that lived in the same soil, drank from the same water, and reached toward the same light. Something that began the way all human things began.